What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be comparing extended mags with fast mags in Black Ops 3. I get asked all the time which one of these I prefer, so today I decided I'd break down the stats of them, show you guys exactly what they do, as well as my preference for these attachments. Let's get into it. Alright guys, so let's start it off with the actual stats of these attachments. So first off, we have fast mags, and what fast mags does is it decreases your reload time by 45%, and this is a huge reduction that you definitely notice. As for extended mags, it increases our magazine capacity, our total ammo count, as well as our total ammo capacity by 40%. And that's something that a lot of people miss with extended mags. Extended mags is great, and everybody knows it gives you that increased magazine capacity, but a lot of people don't realize that it actually increases the amount of rounds you start with, and it also increases the amount of rounds that you can have in total, assuming you have like scavenger and you're picking up ammo off the ground. So just for an example, with the KN-44, as well as a bunch of the other assault rifles that have a 30 round magazine capacity by default, you will start with 120 rounds plus the 30 rounds that you already have in your magazine, so 150 rounds total. And if you had scavenger and you're picking up rounds off the ground, you can hold a maximum of 240 in your reserve, as well as the 30 round magazine that you have. This is the default, but when you pop extended mags, that 240 maximum capacity goes up to 336. The amount of ammo that you start with, aside from your magazine, goes up from 120 to 168. And finally, your magazine goes from 30 rounds to 42 rounds. So extended mags does actually do a little bit more than a lot of people give it credit for. So now that we know what these do, which one is better? And there really is no perfect answer to this, and some of it is going to be based on your personal opinion and your personal playstyle. But for me, it completely depends on the gun, and for full autos at least, I base it on 3 different factors. And those factors are rate of fire, default magazine capacity, as well as its default reload time. So first up, let's go over rate of fire. And the biggest thing that I consider with rate of fire is I am going to be burning through ammo very quickly. So this is where I start thinking of that benefit of starting with more ammo to begin with, and this is why I tend to lean a little bit more towards extended mags when the rate of fire is higher, but we still have to look at the other factors as well. So guns like the Vesper, for instance, I basically don't use the Vesper unless I'm using extended mags. This doesn't mean that I won't also sometimes combine fast mags on there for an extra attachment, but for the most part, I'm definitely going to be running extended mags no matter what on the Vesper. And that's simply because I want that starting ammo, as well as the fact that the gun isn't very accurate due to its high rate of fire, and therefore I want to be able to miss a few shots and still kill several enemies with a single magazine. So on the opposite end of this, if I have a really low rate of fire gun, let's just pick like the Man of War, for instance, which also still has like a standard magazine capacity, which we'll talk about in a little bit. With the lower rate of fire guns, I just find that extended mags is often a waste because you aren't really burning through those magazines super quickly. And you can often get several kills with a single magazine, no problem, because typically the lower rate of fire guns are going to be a little bit more precise, so you waste less shots per kill. This means on something like the Man of War, for instance, if I were forced to choose one of these attachments, either fast mags or extended mags, I would most likely go with fast mags. But in reality, with that gun, I wouldn't pick either of these attachments. I think it's fine without it. I just wanted to kind of illustrate that point, that typically the lower the rate of fire, the less need you have for extended mags. Moving on to the next factor that I consider for full autos, that is your default magazine capacity. And it's pretty straightforward. The higher magazine capacity you have by default, the less likely I am to run extended mags, and the more likely I would be to run fast mags over that. So with the Weevil, for instance, we have a 50 round magazine by default, which is insanely high for an SMG. Now you could put extended mags and bump that up to 70 round, but that's more of like a novelty sort of thing that's just kind of a fun thing to do every now and then, but it really isn't the most practical use of an attachment. I would much rather go with fast mags on something like the Weevil. Whereas if we look at, let's just say like an HVK, for instance, that one's got a pretty decent fire rate, and it's got a standard sort of magazine capacity of 30 rounds. With this one, I love using extended mags on it because it boosts that up to 42 rounds, and now I can suddenly kill that extra 1 or 2 people per magazine, and it just feels right on the HVK. So the final factor that I consider for full auto guns is their default reload time. And for the assault rifles and SMGs, they all basically fall within a certain range, and they've all got a pretty good reload time. So for those, I don't really factor this in quite as much. It's more so when we start looking at things like the LMGs. Some of the LMGs have a default reload time of like 7 seconds, which is extremely long. But with fast mags, you can cut that down to like 3.85 seconds, which is considerably less time. In a game like Call of Duty, something like 3 seconds is huge. So I'm much more inclined to run fast mags on the LMGs, partially because of that default reload time, but also because they typically have a really high magazine capacity in the first place. So that pretty much covers my preference as far as full auto guns for these two attachments. Now I want to get into the special cases, and the first of those special cases is the MX Garand, which is a DLC weapon. I know not everybody has it, but the thing with the MX Garand is it has a clip rather than a magazine, and it can't be reloaded until it's completely emptied. Also, it has a very low clip capacity in the first place at 8 rounds. Because of this, I actually like running both of these attachments, both fast mags as well as extended mags. But if I really had to choose between one or the other, I would likely go with extended mags on this one, just because 8 rounds really isn't that much. It's usually only enough to comfortably deal with 2 enemies, and even then, if you're missing a bunch of shots, you'll only be able to kill like 1 enemy per clip. So I do slightly prefer running extended mags, but I will run both if I have that opportunity. The next special case is the KRM-262, and this one is really interesting as far as how it behaves with fast mags. With extended mags, it's exactly the same as you'd expect. It increases that magazine capacity by 40%. But with fast mags on the KRM, what happens is the amount of time it actually takes you to load a shell is going to be identical, but with fast mags, what happens is you load 2 shells at a time. So if you get into one of those situations where you ran completely out of ammo and there's still a guy in front of you, you just want to pop 1 quick shell in and take him out as fast as possible, fast mags isn't going to be helping you in this situation because it still takes that same amount of time to load, it's just now loading 2 instead of 1. And this one's actually gotten me killed quite a few times. I thought that fast mags would allow me to like really quickly pop a shell in, but that's not the case. It just pops 2 in that same period of time. So because of this, I typically prefer having extended mags so I just don't run into those situations in the first place. But a lot of people will go with fast mags because they do like the fact that you reload twice as fast by reloading 2 shells in the same time as you would load 1 shell. As for the Breccian Haymaker, I typically just like having extended mags so that I can spray at tons and tons of enemies, just get as much ammo out there as possible. I don't really find fast mags is all that useful for me. I'd much rather have extended mags. For the Argus, and I'm also going to combine like the Locust, the P06, the SVG, and the RSA with the Argus because they all kind of behave similarly, where you're firing just that 1 shot at a time, and typically you've got a decent amount of time between each shot. I will most likely not use either of these attachments, but if I had to choose, I would rather go with extended mags. And the simple reason for that is you're usually not in an extremely stressful situation where you need fast mags. Maybe a little bit more so with the Argus, but even then, you can typically really keep an eye on how many shots you're firing and how many you have remaining, and you can oftentimes find a good time to reload where you're not really under a whole lot of pressure. So that's why I just typically won't run fast mags on those guns. So there we have it. That pretty much covers every gun as far as I'm aware. But like I said, that's just my personal opinions on that. You may agree, you may disagree with me, and that's totally fine. Use what works for you. At least you now have the hard stats, and you'll know exactly what these attachments will do for you. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.